Had my one dad joke. Okay. I got my kids to laugh, so that's good. All right. So we are going through Revelation, and I see we have got quite a few people on today. It's so good to have you all participate and be a part of this congregation and what we're doing. And so it is really good to see you all. There's some of you that haven't been on in a while, and so we were still going through Revelation last time you were on, and we're just working our way through nice and slowly. Today, last week we talked a bit about just the overall structure of chapters 12 through 14. We talked about how that's really a central section in the book of Revelation, and how it's like a grouping of a variety of different visions that John had. Each one is slightly different. They're not necessarily in consecutive order, but each one gives additional color to the picture, as it were. They kind of give some definition, help us understand some of the rest of the theme of Revelation. They give us ways to interpret. And so we're not left alone. When people look and say that Revelation is so hard to interpret, a lot of times they don't realize that the keys to interpreting Revelation are there. When we see that the angel describes what's going on and explains what is going on in one vision, we're supposed to take that one vision and then apply it to the rest of Revelation. And so that's a lot of the visions that we've talked about in chapters 12, 13, and 14, whether it be the woman and the dragon, and then we have the two beasts, the beast of the sea and the beast of the earth. Then last week we had the three messages of the three different angels. Each of these gives that additional bit of color, so we kind of understand what is going on. And then today we're actually going to look at two different perspectives of the harvest. Two different harvests. It's really there's two different calls to harvest in this section. And so we're going to look at that. There's a harvest by the Son of Man, and there's the harvest of the grapes of wrath. So I was going to show a picture of the grapes of wrath from VeggieTales, and I did a search, and apparently somebody wrote a book and a movie about it a long time ago, and so it was very difficult to find a picture of the grapes of wrath. But that being said, let's go ahead and start by reading Revelation chapter 14, starting at verse 14. It says this: "Then I looked, and behold, there was a white cloud, and seated on the cloud was one like a son of man. He had a golden crown on his head, and a sharp sickle in his hand. Then another angel came out of the temple, crying out with a loud voice to the one seated on the cloud, 'Put in your sickle and reap, for the hour to reap has come, because the harvest of the earth is fully ripe.' So the one seated on the cloud swung his sickle over the earth, and the earth was harvested. Then another angel came out of the temple in heaven, and he also had a sharp sickle. And another angel, the one who has the authority over fire that comes out of the altar, or came out from the altar, he called out with a loud voice to the one with the sharp sickle, saying, 'Put in your sickle, and gather together the grapes and clusters from the vineyard of the earth, because the grapes are ripe.' So the angel swung his sickle over the earth and gathered the clusters from the vineyard of the earth and threw them into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was stomped on outside of the city, and blood flowed from the winepress as high as a horse's bridle for 1,600 stadia." 1,600 stadia. What's stadia? That's a great question. I'm glad you've asked. All right, so we're going to go into this in just a minute. I'm trying to find where I'm at. There are two different harvests here, though. Sorry about that. I was having some technical issues. There are two different harvesters, and there's two different sickles. Each one of the harvesters has a sickle. There seem to be two different harvests that are described. So you have the harvest of the Son of Man, and then you have the harvest of this other angel. So with regards to the first harvest, we're just going to look at that in verses 14 through 16. What we see is that it says that there's this Son of Man, and that he's seated on a cloud. There's one like a Son of Man. To understand this perspective, and we've covered the passage in Daniel chapter 7 quite a bit, but this verbiage, these words seem to be taken straight from Daniel. So let's go ahead and read Daniel chapter 7 verse 13. Because it says there, I was watching in the night visions, behold, one like a Son of Man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was brought into his presence. Daniel is describing a man, he's describing a person who has the authority, the ability to walk in the presence of the Lord God Almighty. There is this sense that, just a sense that this man is more than a man. What man has the authority, has the right to stand in the presence of the Lord God Almighty, to literally come into his presence, to be invited into his presence? We know that the Son of Man, or the title Son of Man, became one of Yeshua's favorite titles for himself. So when he's referring to himself, more often than not, he will refer to himself as, well, when the Son of Man comes, and he'll go on and give an explanation. And so Yeshua uses this sense of Son of Man for himself. In fact, when Yeshua was, you could say, convicted or held on trial before the Sanhedrin, he quotes this passage from Daniel, and he says, you will know that I'm the Messiah, because the Son of Man, you'll see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven. The interesting passage of this idea of coming in the clouds of heaven is that this was terminology that was only used for God. There's actually a lot of different archaeological finds that shows that the god Baal came in the clouds of heaven, right? So this was this terminology of that God rode on the clouds of heaven. But of course, God was specifically countering the message or the claim of Baal and all of the other foreign gods. And he says, no, I'm the one who comes in the clouds of heaven. But Yeshua refers to this passage in Daniel. It's the only place where a man comes in the clouds of heaven. And so we have to sit there and say, who is this man? Who is this man? Now, there's a lot of different ideas in the commentators. The commentators that agree with the interpretation that the Son of Man in this perspective is actually Yeshua. So there's commentators that disagree, but the commentators that agree, they point out that this individual in Revelation comes on the clouds, not just with the clouds. They make it, there's a distinction, a different word in the Greek that's used, different conjunction. And they say that this directly alludes to the passage in Daniel 7 verse 13. It's a direct quote from the Septuagint. So when we know that Septuagint was translated about 200 years before Yeshua, it's the Greek version of the Bible, of the Hebrew scriptures. And so when the authors were writing in Greek, a lot of times they would quote directly from the Septuagint, because it was just easier when you're writing in a language to quote from the scriptures in that language. It's the same reason why we quote in English instead of quoting in Hebrew. There's just not as many people that speak Hebrew here. And my wife will will affirm that my Hebrew is not very good. So that being said, we quote in English and we'll use an English Bible to quote. So when the authors of the New Testament are writing in Greek, they're actually using the Septuagint to quote. And so this is a direct quotation from that. The other interpretation is that this Son of Man is actually just one that looks like a man on the clouds, and it's simply another angel. Since the other passages say, and another angel said this. One of the reasons why commentators struggle with this first picture is that you have an angel coming to give this Son of Man a direction or a command. And it seems like an angel is commanding the Son of Man to do something. And we all know that God's not told to do something by his angels. He's the one telling the angels what to do. And so if this is indeed Yeshua, He wouldn't be being told what to do by the angel. And so that's why some interpreters, some commentators, they really struggle with this. They say maybe it just refers to another angel that looks like a man. And so that is one of the interpretations. But it's not held by many, but it is held by some, that point of view. Now let's look at the harvest in particular, this harvest of the Son of Man. There's two different ideas with regards to the harvest. Is the harvest a harvest of the righteous? In other words, is this the Lord, Yeshua, bringing together the righteous? Or is it a harvest of the wicked? And in all honesty, most of the commentators say, well, it would seem like this would be a harvest of judgment. It seems like that this harvest is referencing judgment. That seems to be the way the text is flowing. And when we read this passage, it really brings us back to the concept of harvest as being judgment in Joel chapter 4, or in many English translations, it'll be Joel chapter 3. I'll go ahead and we'll read it together. So Joel chapter 3, or chapter 4, verses 9 through 15, says this. It says, "Proclaim among the nations, prepare for war. Stir up the mighty men. Let the warriors advance and attack. Beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning knives into spears. Let the weak say, I am strong. Rouse yourself and come, all nations around, and gather there. Adonai, bring your mighty ones down. Let the nations rouse themselves and go up to the valley of Jehoshaphat. For there I will sit to judge all the surrounding nations. Swing the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. Come, tread, for the winepress is full. The vats overflow, for their wickedness is great. Multitudes, multitudes in the valley of decision. For the day of Adonai is near in the valley of decision. The sun and the moon become dark. The stars withdraw their brightness." Now, Joel, the actual date of Joel, the dating of Joel, like when it was written, is a little bit unknown, but most believe that Joel was very, very early in the nation of Israel, that it was very, very early, and Joel really saw things in the future. You'll see a lot of the prophets actually quoting from Joel. The concept of the day of the Lord, the day of Adonai, all seems to be quotes from here. Many of you will have understood, and probably, we talk about, we will say, we will quote different parts of this passage, where we talk about, let the weak say I am strong. And we're like, yes, let the weak say I am strong. What we don't realize is that is a call to war. That is a call to war. Now, there's an interesting play on words, the valley of Jehoshaphat. Jehoshaphat is basically is a pieced together name that means the Lord is judge. The Lord is my judge, or the Lord judges. And so there's this sense where it says you're coming down to the valley of judgment, the valley of Jehoshaphat. And so what we see here a lot of different things. Obviously, you probably would have recognized in the second harvest that's mentioned in Revelation, there's this reference to the winepress being full, the vats being overflowing, that their wickedness is great. This sense that this judgment of God is coming against the nations because of the wickedness that is abounding. Now, this concept of going down to the valley of decision and gathering all the nations there to be judged by the Lord is exactly what Yeshua was explaining in Matthew chapter 25, verse 31 through 33. This is what Yeshua says. This is in the context of the Olivet Discourse, so the discussion that Yeshua had on the Mount of Olives with his disciples about the coming of the day of the Lord. And he says this, "Now when the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne, and all the nations will be gathered before him. And he will separate them as one from another, just as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. And we know the rest of this passage. We know that he judges the nations based upon how they treated his brethren. And there's a concept that the Lord treated his brethren, that the concept of brethren references to the least of these. It references to any follower of Messiah Yeshua. And I agree with that interpretation. But how much more so his physical brethren, that the nations themselves will be judged by how they have treated his physical brothers, the nation of Israel. And that goes right along with the promise to Abraham that all that bless you I will bless, and all that despise you I will curse. And so what we see here is the Lord coming in all his glory, and this leads us into the second vision in Revelation, the grape harvest. This concept of the grape harvest, we see there's this other angel, another angel that's sent out, and he's given a sickle, and then with another angel from the altar comes and speaks to the first angel, and then tells him to harvest the grapes. There's this deliberate sense of harvesting the grapes. There's a lot that's packed into that, because the grape harvest happens during this time of the year in Israel, during the time of Sukkot. Sukkot was, supposed to be at the end of the grape harvest. We know that it's autumn time in the Northern Hemisphere at the moment. And so there was this sense of this latter harvest, this harvesting of the grapes. But these are grapes that are thrown into the vat, or the wine press of the Lord's wrath. And so here, this seems to be even closer to the passage in Joel, where it's very clearly speaking of grapes and the punishment overflowing the bowl. There's a sense of it overflowing. One of the commentators puts it this way. This is from Craig Keener. He says, whatever the point of the first vision, the meaning of the second vision is relatively plain. It portrays the wicked as gathered grapes, now crushed into wine in God's winepress, responding or corresponding to the cup of wine of God's anger poured out on them. So the result of Adonai's judgment is described as blood flowing from a winepress of his wrath as high as a horse's bridle, 1,600 stadia. That is approximately 296 kilometers, approximately 200 miles. It's a very far distance. So there's this sense, or this concept of blood flowing for almost 300 kilometers from here to Sydney sort of sense. This massive amount of blood flowing out from outside the city, the concept of blood flowing. Now this concept, whether it's probably hyperbole, there's obviously hyperbole that's used in Scripture, but it was very, very common in the first century to use this sort of hyperbole when referencing war and when referencing destruction especially. To the point that the rabbis, when they wrote the Talmud a couple hundred years later, and they were describing the destruction of Israel in 132 AD during the Bar Kokhba revolt, they actually explained it this way. They said that the horses were drowning in blood, and the blood rolled huge boulders 40 miles out to sea, and that the blood filled the sea as far away as Cyprus. So this is, Craig is commenting from the Talmud, he's quoting from the Talmud, and what the rabbis were saying is that the devastation in Israel was so great that the water turned to blood as far out as to Cyprus. And look, we can look at this and say, well, I don't know if that's physically possible for there to be blood up to a horse's bridle for over 200 kilometers. However, there is no doubt in my mind that the idea or the vision, or we don't even have to wonder what it looks like. We can actually go back to see recently as ISIS, when they were executing thousands of people into the rivers, that the waters turned red from the blood of those being killed. And so this sense is always a it always brings a sense of terror, a sense of overwhelming destruction, a concept of absolute horror due to the destruction of war. There is even one of the commentators mentioned that the battles sometimes were so grotesque, and there wasn't anyone to bury the bodies, that the birds of prey, as they ate the bodies, would literally litter the entire land with pieces of flesh, because there was just so much devastation throughout the entire land. So this concept is supposed to bring an idea of absolute destruction. Now, when we look at this, we're reading this, and here is God commanding through his messengers, through the angels, to bring about this ultimate harvest. Now, when I looked at both of these passages, the passage of the Son of Man and the passage of the second Abel and reaping the grapes, the first thing that came to my mind was a parable that Yeshua spoke. And this parable, I believe, gives us a way of understanding kind of the perspective of both of these harvests. And I just want to read the parable, and then Yeshua actually gives the interpretation. Yeshua said, he presented to them another parable, and he said this: the kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while the men were sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat, and he went away. Now when the stalks sprouted and produced grain, then the weeds also appeared. So the slaves of the landowner came to him and said, Master, didn't you sow good seed in the field? Then where did all the weeds come from? But he replied, an enemy did this. Now the slaves said to him, do you want us then to go out and gather them up? But he said, no. For while you are gathering up the weeds, you may uproot the wheat with them. Let them both grow together until the harvest. At harvest time, I will tell the reapers first to gather up the weeds and tie them into bundles to burn them up, but I will gather the wheat into my barn. And of course, like many of the parables, even his disciples didn't fully understand. And later in the evening, they came and asked Yeshua, what do the parables mean? So Yeshua responded. He says, listen, the one sowing the good seed is the Son of Man, and the field is the world. The good seed, these are the sons of the kingdom, and the weeds are the sons of the evil one. The enemy who sowed them is the devil, and the harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are the angels. Therefore, just as weeds are gathered up and burned with fire, so it will be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send forth his angels. They will gather out of his kingdom all stumbling blocks and those who practice lawlessness. They will throw them into the fiery furnace. In that place will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. And so what we see is that I think that this is the perspective of the harvest. We see a both and sort of approach. There is a harvest that is both the harvest of judgment for the wicked. There is this sense that all the wicked are harvested up, just as the weeds were first gathered up. But then there is also the harvest of the righteous, where the righteous are gathered together into the barn, into the house, into the home of the Lord, into the arms of the Lord. So this parable, I think, really describes exactly what we see in Revelation. That what we see is, and we see that the Son of Man is there. He is the one, he is the Lord of the harvest. He is the one who is directing the harvest. He is the one who's telling these things. And the angels are his messengers. They are the ones, his servants, who are going throughout the world to harvest the souls. And I think that this shows us that, first of all, that the harvest includes both believers and unbelievers. And then when we look at this, we see that the believers, those are the good seed. These are the ones who have taken the word of Yeshua and have applied it. You know, Yeshua spoke a lot about seed and about good seed, and the difference between good seed and bad seed was whether or not they took the words of Jesus and applied them to their lives. So belief in your head was not what Yeshua was talking. Yeshua was talking about a belief that translated into action. And that's what faith is. That's what trust is. That demonstrates the good seed. These are the ones that will be gathered to the Lord and will shine forth like the sun. Now the bad seed, as we saw from the parable, the bad seed are the wicked, those planted by the Lord. We see that in the explanation of the parable, they are the stumbling blocks. That's where Yeshua had said, woe to those who place stumbling blocks before a little one. It would be better for him that a millstone was tied around his neck and be cast into the bottomless sea than for him to cause a little one to stumble. So that using this concept that the stumbling blocks will be removed is what Yeshua is referring to. We talked earlier in our Messianic Judaism class that there are 3 different words for sin in Hebrew. The word for sin, there's the word for transgression, and then there's the word for iniquity. The concept of sin is that you're simply aiming at the target but you miss. So that's the idea that not a single one of us is perfect. Even when we try to do good, we miss the mark. And then there's the concept of transgression, where we deliberately see a boundary and we walk over it. We know God has said, don't do this, and we deliberately do it. That is a transgression. Iniquity is an escalation from that, and iniquity is used in the sense that your sin has grown to a point that you get others involved, or that it involves other people. So there are certain sins that only involve yourself, but when you sin, it does affect other people and you involve other people into your sin. So as an example, not only do you demand that you have the right to sin, but you demand that everybody else accept your right to sin. And then you demand that they participate in your sin. And so this is what we saw with Sodom and Gomorrah, that they demanded those things even from Lot and from the angels who visited Lot. And so this sort of sense is that these are the lawless. They have, when it says lawless, obviously it's meaning and referring to God's law. There's sense of lawlessness is that sense of iniquity, where there's a deliberate transgression and a deliberate rejection of God's definition of right and wrong. Okay? They are the ones who Yeshua says will be gathered up and thrown into the furnace where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. This is a reference to Gehenna, a reference to hell. Yeshua used this terminology throughout his teachings. So how do we apply this to our lives today? I think the application, I think that there's some pretty straightforward applications of these passages to us today. First of all, what we see is that Yeshua is in charge of the harvest. He's the one who's sitting on the cloud. Notice he's sitting up there. He just sweeps his sheath and it says the world is harvested. He's the one directing the harvest. He's the one who's going to actually initiate this harvest. And regardless of how we interpret a single passage, so, this one little passage, does this Son of Man represent Jesus or does it represent an angel? What we need to look at is the broader weight of Scripture. And what we see is that Yeshua is in charge of the harvest. So from the passage in Matthew, it says the Son of Man shall be in charge of the harvest. Okay, Scripture clearly demonstrates that Yeshua has been the one who is appointed. We talked about this last week. We talked about, or I don't know if it was last week or the week before, where Paul is preaching in I think it's in Athens. He's preaching in Athens in the Areopagus or Areopagus, and he declares that the Lord God Almighty, the one true God, has appointed a man who will judge the living and the dead, and he verified that appointment by raising him from the dead. So he's referring to Jesus. He is the man who is appointed to judge the entire world. He is the one who will separate the sheep and the goats. Yeshua talks of this in so many different ways. He says, I am the way, the truth, the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Yeshua also explains that he is the door or the gate. And so nobody comes through the door, no one gets into the sheep pen without going through the gate. He also calls himself the Good Shepherd. The shepherd would sleep at the gate of the sheepfold so that no one could get into the sheepfold without crossing the shepherd. And so there's this sense that Yeshua, you don't get into heaven without Yeshua. The only way, it's in some cases, in some cities, it's all about who you know. I think Canberra is very much like that. The political cities seem to be all about who you know. You get a job based upon who you know or who knows you. Okay, so getting into heaven's not much different. It's all about who you know and who knows you. Yeshua turned to the foolish virgins and said to them, "Depart from me, I never knew you." There's this sense that it's all about knowing Yeshua and Him knowing us. So that's the first application is Yeshua is the one who is in charge of the harvest. The second is about this time appointed for the harvest. Okay, so there is an hour coming when the wickedness of this world will be judged. One of the biggest objections to believing in God, so one of the biggest objections that atheists raise is the problem of evil. Why is there evil in the world? And evil's broken up into several different categories. People have written volumes on this. But the reality of evil is actually quite a difficult question to answer. Well, it's an easy to understand from a biblical perspective, but it involves us very emotionally because why do earthquakes and tsunamis and all these terrible natural events happen? And then what about the evil of war? If God does a good job and He's a good God, then how does He allow all of this evil to exist? Well, part of the answer is here, that God has appointed a time for judgment. Many times throughout Scripture, He says that their wickedness is not full. God told Abraham about the Canaanites 400 years before He brought judgment on them. He says their wickedness is not full. And there was this sense that the cup of wrath was filled by the wickedness of the people. And you got to a certain point where the cup overflowed and God poured out His wrath on the people. And this is exactly this sense here in Revelation, but it's talking of the entire world. God has appointed a time, a day of judgment. So part of the answer of evil is that God is not going to ignore sin. God is going to judge all sinfulness. He will judge all wickedness. The problem, of course, is with regards to this, a lot of times people, they think that they're good enough to escape God's wrath. But when God judges murderers, He's also going to judge those who commit murder in their heart, which Jesus defined as hating your brother. He says, if you hate your brother, it is as though you had murdered him in your heart. The same thing with adultery. When God brings a judgment to adultery and to all of the rapists and murderers and those, we say, oh, those people deserve. Well, wait a second. Jesus says if you have looked at a woman, and in our culture, if you looked at a woman or a man with lust in your heart, it is as though you have committed adultery in your heart. And so when we call for God's judgment and God's justice, we need to be very well aware that we are saved by His grace and that we were once sinners and that we are saved by grace. The third point is that there is a warning of God's wrath. Every single time throughout Scripture, when God talks of the blessings, He will always mention the curses. He says, if you obey, then these are the blessings. If you disobey, these are the curses. God has no problem using fear to motivate us. You see, a lot of times when we look at, we like to express and share the loving nature of God, the mercy of God. But in our world and our culture today, in many cases, you actually have to share the bad news before you share the good news. You have to tell people the reason why God is bringing judgment, because they don't even realize that they are sinners. They think that they are a good person. And they need to be shaken out of that place, out of that comfort that this denial. We talk about denial in many of in the class that we have, the transformation through Messiah. Denial is one of the biggest problems. Now, denial comes from pride. You see, pride is blinding. If you say, I have no problems, I have no sin, I have no issues, I am fine, thank you very much. What you're saying is, God, you don't know what you're talking about. I think I'm okay, and my opinion is more important than yours. You see, that's what pride basically is. Pride is, it says we think of ourselves more highly than we ought to think, and what that means is we think of ourselves in a way that God is not thinking of us. Now, it is absolutely true that God so loved the world that he gave his only beloved Son, that whosoever should believe on him will have eternal life. But when it says, in this way God loved the world, it is a reference to the previous verse when it talks of how Moses raised a serpent up onto a stake. And he told the people, those who are bitten by the snakes, come and look at the serpent and you will be healed. In that situation, God did not remove the snakes. He allowed them to continue to bite people. But he provided a way of escape so that those who would look at the salvation that was lifted up onto a pole would be healed and saved. But those who chose not to, those who said, I can just deal with this snake bite, thank you very much, God, I don't need you, those people would die. Fear is something that is absolutely important. Now, I know that there's many scriptures that talk about how perfect love casts out fear, but there are just as many scriptures like in Jude that says, keep yourselves in the love of God, eagerly waiting for the mercy of our Lord Yeshua, the Messiah who leads to life. So yes, we're called to live in that love, but Revelation 14 verse 7 says that he said with a loud voice, fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come. Worship the one who made heaven and earth, the sea and the springs of water. And as believers, we know that we are not appointed unto wrath, but I want to close with the rest of that passage. We a lot of times will mention, but we as believers, we're not appointed to wrath, but we forget the rest of the scripture. And that comes from 1 Thessalonians 5, verses 1 through 11. And I'm going to close with this scripture. This is what it says. Now concerning the times and seasons, brothers and sisters, you have no need for anything to be written to you, for you yourselves know very well that the day of the Lord comes like a thief in the night. When they are saying shalom and safety, sudden destruction comes upon them like a woman having birth pains in the womb. And there is no way that they will escape. But you, brothers and sisters, are not in the dark, so that the day might overtake you like a thief. For you are the sons of light and sons of day. We are not of the night or of darkness. So then let us not sleep as others do, but let us remain on alert and sober-minded. For those who sleep, sleep at night, and those who get drunk at night. But since we are of the day, let us be sober-minded, putting on the breastplate of faithfulness and love, and the hope of salvation as a helmet. For God did not destine us for wrath, but for obtaining salvation through our Lord Yeshua the Messiah. He died for us so that whether we may be awake or asleep, we may live together with him. Therefore, encourage one another and build each other up, just as you are in fact doing. So this is the passage that says that God did not destine us for wrath, but it comes immediately after a warning that we stay alert and sober-minded. It comes directly after a warning that judgment will overtake the unbelievers like a thief in the night, and that we are not to be like the world, but we are to have our eyes open so that the day of the Lord does not overtake us like a thief in the night. So it's just a warning to remember that the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. And sometimes fear can be a very good thing if it gets you to act in preservation of your life. And so the threat of hell and death and the judgment of God is exactly what all of the New Testament apostles preached. This is exactly what Peter preached on the day that the Holy Spirit came. He preached judgment, and then he preached mercy. It's exactly what Paul preached to the people in Athens. He preached judgment, that Jesus is coming to judge the world, but that there is mercy in him. And so this is what we should also be preaching, that there is a day of judgment coming, and there is a time of harvest, but there is mercy for those who put their trust in Yeshua. Amen. Abba Father, I just ask that you would help us take these words to our heart. You would help us to apply them. And Lord, help us to be willing to warn our loved ones who don't know you yet of the coming judgment. Lord, help us to be willing to tell them the truth of your word, that where there is sin, there will always be judgment, that God is coming to judge the living and the dead, but that there is mercy in you. I just pray for that in Yeshua's precious name. Amen. Amen. Alrighty. So I wanted to open it up now